Hey guys, what's going on? Blaine back for another Netflix review, and today I'm going to be talking about Paper Lives. Paper Lives is a Turkish melodrama set in modern day Istanbul and tells the story of Mehmet, who manages the local garbage factory in his neighborhood. Right at the beginning of the movie, we see that Mehmet is a dedicated and hardworking man. He's pulling a heavy load of garbage on the street close to where he works, and then all of a sudden he collapses on the ground in his factory, which prompts his brother Gonzi to call an ambulance. And I'm not sure if Gonzi really was his brother or not. The word brother gets thrown around a ton throughout the movie's story. It's used to describe the brotherhood and the relationship between Mehmet and his workers at the garbage factory, which includes Gonzi, but Mehmet and Gonzi are featured a lot together in this movie, so for all I know, maybe Gonzi is his actual brother. Anyway, Mehmet has to go to the hospital, and we find out really quick that he's suffering from failing kidneys, and his condition is terminal to a point that he will die if he doesn't get a donor pretty soon. So until he gets that donor, there's not really much he can do other than wait or sit around and die, and he doesn't want to do that at all. He wants to stay as busy as possible, which upsets his brother Gonzi and his uncle Tazin. Despite them insisting to Mehmet that he needs to stay home and rest, he doesn't take their advice to heart and continues to show up at work every day to provide a service both to his community and to the workers who depend on him for money. And at this point in the movie, he comes across as very upbeat and very positive. He always makes positive remarks to people that he's walking across on the street, and he gives out money to homeless children on the street. You find out very quickly early on in the movie that there's a lot of commentary going on with regards to the homeless situation in Istanbul. There's a wide range of people in this movie, ranging from youngsters sniffing glue on the side of the road to your average group of drunk hobos that take up shelter in a house. And we can tell early on in the movie that Mehmet is very easily relatable to all those homeless people, and as it turns out, later on in the movie we find out that he in fact used to be homeless himself. It's never really alluded to in the beginning what happened that led to him being homeless in the first place, but it does explore that later on as the story goes on, especially towards the end. And I like that they didn't make Mehmet out to be so miserable right at the beginning. They very easily could have, based on all the depressing circumstances of all the other people that surround him and how he's constantly immersed in that situation of negativity, but he's always doing things to try and stay above that. He's in a better place than most other characters in the movie. He's got his own job, he's got his own brotherhood of people that he can depend on, and he's got a place to stay. So he's already steps above a lot of people in his community, but then something comes along that changes things completely for him. One day at work, he's getting ready to close up shop for the day, but he hears a noise before he leaves. He goes out in the back where all the garbage is to try and investigate where the noise came from, and he ends up finding a kid stowed away in a garbage bag who then goes out to hide in the back somewhere. Mehmet manages to coax the child out of his hiding spot, and they begin to talk to each other more specifically about the boy's circumstances and what led to him stowing away in the garbage bag. Mehmet finds out the boy came from a really bad family situation. He was clearly physically abused by his stepfather, and he was abandoned by his mother, and ultimately he decides to take the child under his wing and gets him to live at his place despite Gonzi and his other family members' objections. And the rest of the movie basically follows Mehmet building a relationship with the boy whose name is Ali while trying to come to terms with his own terminal illness and figure out what he's going to do with the child whenever he dies. The movie is very much a melodrama in every sense of the word, from the fact that Mehmet is dying of a terminal illness to the fact that Ali comes from such a horrible family background. This movie is absolutely loaded with melancholy. And if you're not a fan of sad movies in general, if you don't like being depressed constantly, you probably want to stay away from this movie because there are a lot of sad things that happen in it. That's not to say that this movie is completely depressing 100% of the time. Most of the time the movie lightens up whenever Mehmet is interacting with the rest of his brotherhood from the garbage factory. Gonzi is the best source of comedy relief in this regard. He's always trying to find ways to encroach into other districts where other garbage workers are, and he always tries to steal liquor bottles because apparently they're worth the most liras, whereas most other regular garbage such as cardboard or whatever aren't worth quite so much in comparison. So Gonzi ends up getting chased by one group of workers, and he manages to evade them in the most hilarious way possible. He takes his cart that he has behind him and he starts skating downhill on a plastic water bottle. I was just laughing my butt off watching that whole thing happen, especially when Gonzi was taunting all the workers. He's doing all these rude gestures to all of them. Oh man, it was so hilarious. It's nice that they have a character like Gonzi in this movie to kind of break things up a little bit and take a break from all the melancholy that's happening in the rest of the scenes. If it weren't for him, this movie would have been a lot less fun to watch. Ultimately, however, the movie is very much a character study, and it's completely centered on the relationship between Mehmet and Ali. I can't say a lot about this movie's story without spoiling it, and you really do have to see this movie in order to properly understand the relationship between the two, but I thought, for the most part anyway, that the relationship between Mehmet and Ali was very well done. Because Mehmet sees a lot of himself in Ali in the fact that he had far from an ideal childhood, he does his absolute best to give Ali the best possible childhood possible. He takes the boy out to the beach, he takes him out to the bathhouse, he takes him to pretty much anywhere that you can think of. They go on all kinds of trips together and do all sorts of things together, which straightens the relationship between Mehmet and Ali as the story goes along. At the same time, however, we start to see a lot more dissonance and tension developing between Mehmet and the members of his brotherhood as the story goes along, and they all start to see that Mehmet isn't quite acting the same way that he used to. This is very much one of those movies where little things happen in the beginning and middle that you don't really notice or pay much attention to at first, but when you look back on it after watching the movie, you go, oh, I get it now. Some people might not be a fan of that in the sense that they might have to re-watch a movie in order to fully understand it, but I didn't feel that I really needed to rewatch it. After reading up a few reviews of the movie after it all ended, I felt that it started to make a bit more sense to me. Honestly, I don't think the movie would have worked out half as well as it did if it weren't for the lead actor who played Mehmet. I don't remember his name, but apparently he's a very famous actor in his home country of Turkey. And honestly, watching him on screen, I can completely understand why. He completely steals the show in whatever scene he's in, which is most of them, and he emulates whatever mood is being portrayed to a T, whether he's happy, sad, and especially when he's in pain, as he's always writhing around whenever those scenes do occur, as his body is slowly but surely failing him. And in spite of that pain that he's going through, in spite of that impending death that is unavoidable, he still tries to carry through his day with a smile on his face, as he wants nothing but the best for Ali. And I thought his characterization in this movie was absolutely brilliant. I'm not going to talk too much more about this movie for fear of getting into spoiler territory, but I do want to talk about the ending just a little bit. I completely understand why they took the direction that they did with it, but I wasn't really a fan with how it played out. It's one of those plot twist endings that completely turns the movie on its head within the last 5 or 10 minutes, and I absolutely hate it when a movie does this. I cannot stand when a movie feels the need to turn its own conventions upside down within the last few minutes just so it can get some sort of emotional reaction out of the viewer. And again, it's not that I don't understand why they took the direction that they did with it. I absolutely do understand, especially after having read up reviews of this movie after the fact, but I just felt that it was way too rushed and it just needed a little bit more explaining. I would have liked to have some sort of falling action, and I think it was technically considered falling action at the end, but it was very haphazard, if you could call it that. The movie also explores the mental health side of things with being homeless, usually with regards to other characters, but then it slowly shifts the focus more towards Mehmet as his illness progresses in severity. I'm not really the biggest fan of how Mehmet's mental illness was portrayed in this movie. It's not the fact that I don't believe it shouldn't have been there, because clearly you see him taking a lot of medication whenever he's supposed to, and maybe a little bit too much in order to deal with his illness. But the other characters around Mehmet don't really acknowledge the mental illness that's going on. They just kind of hand wave it off or make excuses to not address it until things really start escalating toward the ending. And again, after watching the movie and then looking back on things in hindsight, things do make more sense in the way that they addressed it, but I thought the way that they did address it was totally inappropriate. I just don't think the way that all played out would have happened in a real world situation. And I know this is a movie and it's not supposed to be 100% realistic, but I couldn't help but compare it to a real life scenario in this regard. Outside of those things though, I thoroughly enjoyed watching Paper Lives. It may not be everyone's cup of tea with how sad the whole story is throughout most of it anyway, but for what it was, I thought it was very well done. It provides an interesting character study of a man who never had any anything to begin with, and then all of a sudden he's thrown into the responsibility of raising a child, and he has to find out what he can make do with that, considering the fact that he never had a childhood to begin with, and thus doesn't have any role models that he can depend on or fall back onto for advice. And the fact that they show that relationship being so positive between the two, between Mehmet and Ali, I thought was great. They were a beacon of light throughout this whole movie. And I just realized that that's a great metaphor that you could use for this movie. The fact that they're a beacon of light that sheds light on the homelessness situation that's going on in Istanbul, both in this movie and in real life. Right before the story even kicks off, the movie opens with a title card that's dedicated to the homeless youth that have no one to depend on in Istanbul. So you can pull all kinds of damning bits of commentary that highlight just how bad the homelessness situation really is in Istanbul, and all other parts of the world for that matter. It really is a crying shame that there are so many kids out there in the world that don't have a loving, caring home and parents that they can depend on. And I find that that's something that's just not talked about a whole lot, not just in movies, but real life in general. So I love the fact that this movie exists for two reasons. One, it's an amazing character study from beginning to end, and two, it provides a voice for marginalized youth who absolutely need to be heard. If you love watching dramas, specifically melodramas that have a constant vibe of sadness toward them, while having a little bit of tension broken here and there, you absolutely should check out this movie. Even though I thought the ending was crazy and I didn't really like how it approached the topic of mental illness, the relationship between Mehmet and Ali more than made it up for me. I really enjoyed watching this movie, and I absolutely love the message that was behind it. I hope that Netflix releases more movies like these that have a strong social message and theme attached to it. Anyways, guys, that's going to wrap up my review of Paper Lives. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, stay tuned for the next part, where next time I review the documentary, The Lost Pirate Kingdom. Bye-bye.